to, soil health is something that, frankly, I ignored for a long time in my life. And it wasn't until I discovered that the soil is actually a living, breathing organism, just like we are, just like our animals are, just like our plants are. And there's actually more life in the soil than there is above the soil surface if we treat the soil right. And if we want really good food that has incredibly rich flavor and is nutrient dense, that is completely dependent on how we manage the soil and the health of that soil.
You're listening to Gray's Cast, a show that shares the secrets to selling perishable food products online. The show and advice is brought to you by the team at Seven Sons, which is an 8-figure e-commerce business that started completely from scratch. Each episode, we bring you one topic, 3 strategies, and one tangible resource to continue your learning and put you on the fast track in your own e-commerce journey. Let's begin.
A nation that destroys its soil destroys itself.
There we go. We're ready. That's a great quote to launch this next episode of Gray's Cast. Thanks everyone for joining us. And today we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to talk about the top 3 ways that you can know if you're improving soil health on your land. So,
Right. So what are the vital signs to watch for to know if you're improving that? And this is a good episode for us soil health geeks. I know there's a lot of folks that listen that are mainly just into marketing, but this is also great for those that are doing both production
well, but
and
also
marketing.
for marketers out there who rely on grower partnerships. This is really important for you to know to help identify the right partnerships and communicate to your customers the difference that you hold in the marketplace. So to help us dive deep into this topic, we have Alan Williams, Dr. Alan Williams, joining us again, who's the domain expert. Alan, thanks for joining us for another conversation.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously some of our listeners, if this is your first time listening to the episode, we had another episode released with Alan where we talked about the top 3 value-added cuts to save on a beef carcass. Alan went into more detail into his background, so be sure to go back and listen to that episode. But Alan, for maybe someone who's listening for the first time, can you speak a little bit to your work with soil health and why someone should listen to you when it comes to this topic?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Soil health is something that, frankly, I ignored for a long time in my life. And it wasn't until I discovered that the soil is more than just this medium that holds a plant root and needs fertilizer and all of that, that it's actually a living, breathing organism, just like we are, just like our animals are, just like our plants are. So they're what I call the soil microbe plant interface is truly a living, breathing, intact organism and needs to be treated as such. And there is actually more life in the soil than there is above the soil surface if we treat the soil right. And if we want really good food that has incredibly rich flavor and is nutrient dense, that is completely dependent on how we manage the soil and the health of that soil.
Mm-hmm. We always remind our customers that, you know what, you go to the grocery store and you pay more for these labels, but that's all they are. A label does nothing to the product. The only thing that will affect the nutrient density of the product, the only thing is the soil.
That's exactly correct. And we're even doing some very high-level research right now. It's a big word called metabolomic analysis, but that's
I expect that word from you, Alan.
Yeah, right. That's a mouthful, but we're doing this in conjunction with Duke University School of Medicine and Dr. Fred Provenza, who we all know very well. Mm-hmm. And what we're finding is that is precisely correct, that the level of metabolomics allows us to be able to analyze more than 2,500 different nutritional spectra in any food, whether it's a plant-based or protein-based food. And what we're finding is rather staggering, that there can be as much as an 85% difference in nutrient density in the exact same foods, depending on how they were produced.
How much of a
Wow.
difference did you say?
85?
85.
As much as an 8. So one food, so I could take hamburger and compare it to hamburger, or corn and compare it to corn, or a tomato to a tomato. And depending on the soil that produced that product, then there can be as much as an 85% difference in the nutrient density, even though it's considered the same product. So that's rather profound, and that ought to speak volumes to us when we consider just how important the soil that our plants are growing in and that our animals are eating is for our ultimate health.
And is the food industry starting to take note of what's happening in regenerative agriculture, Alan?
Oh, they absolutely are. There is no doubt about that. You've got companies like General Mills that are becoming very dedicated to the advancement of regenerative agriculture, and they're not only speaking the language, but they are investing heavily in training farmers, teaching farmers how to operate regeneratively.
And you guys have had, actually, your team has had firsthand experience working with General Mills on those projects, correct?
Absolutely, and it sure has been a pleasure, because they are allowing us to be able to do exactly what we need to do to teach and train those farmers and to equip them to be regenerative producers.
Yep. Obviously, a big part of the future, if you're in ag, you need to be thinking about this, and obviously tying it back to marketing and a food business. We need to be able to speak to our customers and provide them what we're actually telling them we're providing them. So, and I think the challenge here, and I know it was for us, Alan, getting started, and it's easy to get really excited about regenerating your soil, and you dive in, and the worst thing is you don't want to be a producer that spends the first 3 years and not really knowing if he's going anywhere or she's going anywhere and making progress in the soil. And you don't want to, you hate to spend your first 3 years spinning your wheels and just to find out you really haven't made progress. So that's what we wanted to bring you on and ask Alan, is how, as a new producer, what do I need to be watching for? What are the vital signs so that on year one, I know if I'm on the right track? I don't have to wait 2 to 3 years to know that. So give us some confidence there. What tools, what resources, and what tactics can you recommend?
Absolutely. So there's 3 critical things that we utilize in working with farmers and ranchers, and these allow us to first establish a baseline, and that's important. You got to know where you're at currently, and then wherever you are. That's okay. But from that point forward, now we have a way to be able to measure and track progress if we clearly define where you are at the current time. And so these 3 things allow us to both establish that baseline and then to be able to use them as a barometer against which to measure future progress or success. The first one involves the use of a very high-tech, expensive tool called a shovel. Every farm has a shovel, and if you don't, I don't think you can technically be a farm.
No.
So it's pretty simple. There's a number of things that we can actually measure and observe through using a shovel. And believe it or not, many farmers out there today have never actually stuck a shovel in the ground for the purpose of being able to evaluate soil health status. So the first thing that we can do is we can look at soil aggregates. So when I stick a shovel in the ground, and we like to typically go about 1 foot deep and take a divot up out of that soil, and the first thing I'm going to look at is how aggregated is that soil. And the soil aggregates, I call them the cheese curds of soil. So it's soil particles that are stuck together by biological glues that are produced by the microbes in the soil, particularly mycorrhizal fungi. So the better job we're doing at building those microbes in the soil, then the more aggregated our soil is going to be. And those aggregates are sticking together of the soil particles to form bigger particles, creates more pore space in the soil, and it allows for far greater water infiltration and oxygenation of the soil. The second thing that we can do is we can smell the aroma of the soil when we do the shovel test. The aroma teaches us a lot. If it has a deep, rich, earthy aroma, then that means that that soil has really good biological activity and fungal to bacterial balance. If it has sort of a sour or musty aroma, that means it's sort of anaerobic in nature, and that's not desirable. Or if it has a metallic or acidic aroma to it, then that means it's highly bacteria-centric. It's not balanced with the amount of fungi that needs to be in the soil versus the bacteria. The third thing we look at when we do the shovel test is the color of the soil. And the color tells us a lot. If we've got a deeper, darker color, then that tells us we're building more organic matter, more carbon in that soil. And then the last thing that I look at with the shovel test is the life in the soil. So do we see earthworms? Do we see evidence of beetles and other creatures that have actually been burrowing in the soil?
Not to take us off topic here on a rabbit trail, but benefits of earthworms. Give us some benefit. We know those are highly beneficial.
Earthworms are incredible. First of all, they help further aerate the soil. They create all these tunnels in the soil through when you get rainfall, then that water can infiltrate, or if you use an irrigation, it makes the irrigation far more effective. So they create all of these burrows, all of this pore space in the soil for better infiltration. They also move seeds in the soil from the latent seed bank, like native seeds and all of that. They move them up closer to the surface of the soil so they can germinate. So they actually play a strong role in seed germination. Earthworms also produce castings, their waste, their manure, so to speak, that is incredibly rich in minerals and nutrients and even nitrogen. So earthworm castings are a natural fertilizer that is applied to our soil. So I really love them. And then they become food for other creatures in the soil food web that are also vital to the health of our soil and our plants and to us.
So it's really pretty simple. Let's get a shovel and let's start counting the earthworms and get a baseline for where you are today.
That's absolutely correct. So number two, the shovel test is number one. Number two is another fairly simple test. We use a ring. It can be made out of metal or even PVC pipe, 6 inches in diameter and 6 inches long, to do what we call single ring infiltration test. And we call that a single ring infiltrometer. And so we can just simply pound that in the ground 3 inches deep. And there's a lot of YouTube videos on how to do water infiltration using the single ring infiltrometer. So our listeners that are interested in doing this can just simply Google this on YouTube and find very, very helpful videos. But this tells you very quickly how well you are infiltrating rainfall. And this has huge implications both on drought and flood mitigation, erosion control, and your ability to either lose your nutrients and sediment on your soil through runoff, or to be able to keep those nutrients. And we all know that this is a huge problem, nutrient runoff leaching into our streams, our rivers, our bays, and our lakes are causing phosphorus or phosphate and nitrogen issues, causing blue-green algal blooms or cyanobacteria blooms that are very, very harmful, and even causing the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. So a simple water infiltration test is wonderful to be able to monitor and track. The better you can infiltrate water, the better your soils are performing.
Well, in a way, you don't have to increase your participation of the rainfall in your area to get more water into your soil and grow up more of a crop. So.
Well, it's like, one of my partners and good friends, Gabe Brown, always says, it's not how much rain you get, it's how much rain you keep.
Yeah. Yep, exactly. And again, very simple test. But we had never done that, Alan, until you were out here. What was it, 6-7 years ago?
Right.
And we did that first test, and it was so simple but so much fun to watch and time that water go in, and then to walk over to a field that was farmed conventionally and to see the difference.
Yeah.
So That's a fun test. Cool. So that was number 2.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Number 2. So number 3, this is where we actually get to a test that's a little more analytical, and not call it a suite of tests. They're very, very useful to us in being able to first, again, clarify where we're at currently and then monitor and track progress in the future. And it's a suite of tests called the Haney test, Haney, and the PLFA, and that stands for phospholipid fatty acid. And every microbe in the soil has phospholipid fatty acids in their cellular composition, and those can be measured. So the combination of these 2 tests, so you would collect soil samples just like you do for a standard soil test and send it off to a lab that has the capability of being able to perform the Haney and the PLFA test. And when you get these results back, they are very telling. And I'll just go through very quickly what some of the most critical measurements that these tests gives you. So the Haney test gives us the standard pH and organic matter of the soil that we get on a standard test, but it also gives us a number of other factors. It tells us the CO2 burst or respiration in the soil, which is a high-level measurement of microbial activity or biological activity in the soil. It gives us water extractable organic carbon. We call that the WEOC. So the amount of carbon in the soil that is actually available for microbes to utilize to fuel themselves. And then the specific form of that organic carbon that they utilize is called the microbially active carbon, or the %MAC. And that is the actual fraction of carbon that the microbes can immediately use to fuel themselves to perform their work in the soil. We also get the carbon to nitrogen ratio. This is something that most farmers and ranchers completely ignore, but yet is hugely important to their ability to be able to manage the nutrient cycling, the water cycling, and the productivity of their soil. Is that C to N ratio, or carbon to nitrogen ratio. So you actually get that ratio in this test. Then you get not only the inorganic forms of all of the minerals or the elements in the soil, which you would get out of a standard soil test, but it also gives you the organic forms of nitrogen, of phosphorus, and so forth. And though knowing the organic form is critical, because that gives us a bigger, broader picture of the total minerals potentially available for plant uptake in our soil. And then the final important component there is what we call the soil health calculation, or soil health score. And just to give you a reference point here, we like to see your soil health score be 20 or higher. But unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of soils today that are in the single digits.
So that's kind of a summary score of your entire test in a way?
That's correct. So it takes all of those important factors that I just mentioned and combines them to get that soil health score.
So you say at least 20 is where you want to see, but if you're starting off with a conventionally row-cropped farm that's been that way for 10, 20, 30 years, what's that going to test come back at? You're on year one, when you're establishing your baseline, if that's what you're starting with.
Yeah, typically we're going to see numbers 6, 8, 9, right around in there. Single digits or very, very low double digits, like a 10 or 11 maybe. But and we have seen some that are 5 or below, unfortunately. But on the other end of the spectrum, just to give you an idea of what can be achieved, we are now seeing soil health scores on regenerative farms that are exceeding 50.
Wow. And how much progress can be made in your first 2 to 3 years when it comes to even relating back to this score?
That's a great question, and actually quite significant progress. We can see somebody with, say, an initial soil health score of a 6 or 8, and within 3 years have a soil health score that is 20 or higher.
Wow, cool.
Yes.
Yeah, that's inspiring. So the number one thing you're trying to do here is get your baseline. And there's a quote that we remind ourselves of, that you can't, the quickest way to get from where you are now to where you want to be is the truth. So get the truth about where you are, and then you have something to measure against and know if your actions are creating the progress that you're looking for. And if not, you turn to other folks that have went before you and learn from them. Ask them. Don't try to reinvent the process. There's a lot of us now in this community, and it's a very open and sharing group of people in that and regenerative agriculture community. So.
That is exactly correct. And in the final test here, just real quickly, this PLFA, that's actually a measure of the microbes themselves in the soil. So it'll give you what's called a total living microbial biomass in nanograms per gram of soil, but then it breaks it down, and it'll tell you the major classes of bacteria in the soil and how much is there, the major classes of fungi, protozoa, and then it'll give you the ratios, the gram negative to gram positive bacteria ratio, the fungi to bacteria ratio, predator to prey ratio. And these are critical in allowing us to be able to assess the progress we're making in building that soil microbial population, what I like to call the livestock beneath the soil.
Exactly. So, Brooks, what was the summary of these? First was the shovel test?
Shovel test was number one, which I like. Easy for anyone to do.
Yep.
And these are fun because these are really like the key performance indicators of your soil, which we talk about having those in your business and really many different areas of your business.
Yep.
So number two was you called it the single ring infiltration test?
That's correct.
Okay. It's another easy test anyone can do. And then we have the Haney test and the PLFA test. So these are standard soils tests. You're taking soil samples, sending those in, getting results back. So
Exactly.
is there, just thinking about these different tests, how highly do you recommend for someone to really do all three and constantly monitor all three?
And how often, at what pattern would you recommend?
Excellent question. So first of all three do need to be done because they paint a much more complete picture of what is occurring in your soil and allowing you to be able to judge whether the practices you've been implementing have been beneficial or detrimental to building your soil. The shovel test should be done fairly routinely. I recommend that everybody just carry a shovel. I like to use a spade or sharpshooter, and they're very easy to use. They're short, so I can throw it in the back of my buggy, and we just keep one in our buggies at all times.
You should be doing that constantly then, looking
in different areas of your land, then obviously. So a quick, easy way to kind of gauge where you're at on different.
At least once a week, but pretty much every time I go out into a field, any field, I'm sticking a shovel in the ground. Because I really want to know what's going on. The water infiltration test you can do once annually. Try to do it around the same time of year and under very similar conditions in terms of soil moisture so that you're comparing apples to apples, but at least once annually on every major area of your farm. And then the Haney and PLFA, I also recommend do those once annually. And again, collect those soil samples at about the same time of year each year under similar soil moisture conditions.
And one thing I want to say, especially if you're new to implementing regenerative practices and studying these tests, is even if you don't understand the test completely right now, go ahead and take it, get a baseline, because you will appreciate that even if it's 1 or 2 years down the road when you truly understand everything about these tests. And of course, the tests are pretty simple when you have an aggregate measurement like you're mentioning. You can at least understand that. Do I have a score of 6, 20? But at least start taking them, and you can learn them as you go. But get a baseline, and you'll be glad that you got those tests done. So
absolutely,
awesome. This has been great, Alan.
Yep, fun as always. As far as our resource that we want to leave you with, Alan, I hope you guys don't mind, but we're going to point our audience to a resource that you guys have on the Soil Health Academy website here with your guys' fact sheet for the 6 principles of soil health. So just a fun little resource for you to keep handy to remind you probably on a lot of the things that we've touched on today. So be sure to download the resource.
And make sure you check out the other resources on the Soil Health website, soilhealthacademy.org. And then the other website is understandingag.org.
understandingag.com.
Okay.
And we do have an array of resources on both of those websites, including presentations, archived webinars, lots of articles, videos. So yes, please utilize those resources. They're free to you.
We've learned so much from you, Alan, and the rest of the team there at Soil Health Academy.
Thanks for joining us again. We appreciate it.
Thank you.